When the River Forgets. A story of displacement and endurance. Part 1. The Breaking. The messenger arrived on a morning when the mist hung low over the river, turning the world gray and uncertain. Nataki saw him first. A young man from the southern band, his horse lathered with sweat, his face drawn tight with exhaustion, or fear, or both. She was grinding corn outside her mother's lodge when he rode past, heading straight for the council house. He did not look at her, did not look at anyone. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, as if looking away might make him disappear. Nataki's hands stilled on the grinding stone. Around the village, others had noticed, too. Women straightened from their work. Children stopped playing. Even the dogs went quiet, sensing the shift in the air. Her mother, Mapi, emerged from the lodge, wiping her hands on her deerskin skirt. She was a tall woman, strong despite her 50 winters, her black hair threaded with silver, but her back still straight as a pine. "Go find your brother," she said quietly. "Mother." "Now, Nataki." Nataki rose and walked toward the fields where her brother Amik worked with the other men, preparing the ground for spring planting. The corn from last year's harvest sat in baskets inside the lodges, enough to last until the next crop came in. Enough, barely, if they were careful.
But watching the messenger disappear into the council house, Nataki had the sudden, terrible feeling that their careful rationing would not matter. That something was coming that would make all their preparations meaningless. The council met for 3 hours. When the doors finally opened, the elders filed out with faces like stone. Nataki's uncle, Kime, who led the council, stood on the steps and waited for the village to gather. People came slowly, reluctantly, knowing that news delivered this way was never good. Nataki stood with her mother and Amik, her younger sister Ayana clinging to Mapi's hand. The child was only 8 winters old, too young to understand, but old enough to be afraid. Kime spoke without preamble. His voice was steady, but Nataki could hear the anger beneath it, held down with effort. "The agent has given us until the next full moon," he said. "We are to leave these lands and move to the territory the government has designated for us, 300 miles west. If we do not go willingly, soldiers will come to force us." Silence. Then everyone began talking at once, shouting, arguing, demanding to know how this could happen, why, what they had done to deserve this. But Nataki already knew the answers. She had heard the stories from other villages, other bands. The pattern was always the same. The white settlers wanted the land. The land was good, fertile soil, clean water, forests full of game.
So they drew lines on paper and said the land was theirs now, had always been theirs, would be theirs forever. And if people were already living there, that was unfortunate, but irrelevant. "We cannot go," someone shouted. "This is our home. Our ancestors are buried here." "The corn is planted," another voice added. "We will starve if we leave now." "We will starve if we stay," Kemi said heavily. The agent was clear. No food, no supplies, no trade if we refuse. And if we resist, soldiers will come. We have seen what soldiers do to those who resist. Yes, they had all seen, or heard, or felt the weight of that knowledge, pressing down like a hand on the throat. "When do we leave?" Mapi asked. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and calm. Keme looked at her with something like gratitude. "In 10 days. We take what we can carry and burn the rest." "Burn it," Amik said, incredulous. "Why?" "So the settlers cannot use it, so they do not profit from what they have stolen." Nataki understood the logic, but felt sick anyway. Burn the lodges they had built with their own hands? Burn the grain stores that represented months of labor? Burn the carefully tended gardens, the tools, the things that made life bearable? But looking at her uncle's face, she understood something else, too. This was the only power they had left, the power to deny the thieves their full victory. It was a small power, bitter and destructive, but it was theirs. "We will help," Mapi said.
"Tell us what needs to be done." The next 10 days passed in a blur of desperate activity. People sorted through their belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The choices were brutal: food or clothing, tools or blankets, heirloom items that held memories or practical things that would help them survive. Nataki packed and repacked their bundles until her mother finally took them from her hands. "Enough," Mapi said. "We cannot take everything. We cannot take anything that is not essential. But the winter robes, we will make new ones. Father's hunting bow, Amik will make a new one. Grandmother's basket." Mapi's face softened. She picked up the basket, woven from river reeds in a pattern that had been passed down for generations. It was beautiful and useless, too fragile to survive the journey, too large to carry. "Tell me about it," Mapi said. "What?" "Tell me the story of this basket. Who made it? When? Why? Tell me so that I can tell Ayana, so that she can tell her children." Nataki felt tears burn her eyes, but held them back. "Grandmother made it the summer before she died. She used reeds from the bend in the river where the current is slow. She said the slow current made the reeds stronger, more flexible. She wove it in the old pattern, the one her grandmother taught her. She said," her voice cracked, "she said that as long as we remembered the pattern, we could always make more baskets, that the memory was more important than the thing." "Then we will remember," Mapi said firmly. She set the basket down gently, as if laying a child to rest. "And one day, when we are settled again, we will make new baskets in the old pattern, yes?" "Yes," Nataki whispered. But she did not believe it, could not believe it. How could they settle when they were being torn from the only home they had ever known? How could they make anything when everything was being taken from them? On the last night they gathered at the river for a final ceremony. The shamans sang the old songs and offered prayers to the spirits of the water, the land, the ancestors buried in the hills. People wept openly, not bothering to hide their grief. Nataki stood with her family, Ayana's small hand in hers, and looked at the river that had given their people life for generations beyond counting. Her grandmother used to say the river had a memory, that it carried the voices of all who had lived beside it, all who had drawn water from it, fished in it, bathed in it, been born and died within sound of its eternal flow. What would happen to that memory when they left? Would the river forget them? Would it flow on, indifferent, as if they had never existed? "The river will remember," her mother said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Even if we cannot return, the river will know we were here." Nataki wanted to believe this, needed to believe it. But belief was becoming harder every day. The ceremony ended. People returned to their lodges for the last time, to sleep in familiar spaces before abandoning them forever. In the morning, they would burn everything and walk away. The fires started at dawn. Nataki watched her home burn, the lodge where she had been born, where her father had died, where her grandmother had taught her to weave and grind corn and prepare hides. The flames climbed the wooden frame quickly, consuming the bark covering in minutes, sending up plumes of black smoke that stained the pale morning sky. Around the village, other fires burned. Lodges, grain stores, tool sheds, everything. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Children cried. Elders stood with tears streaming down their weathered faces. Young men clenched their fists and stared at the destruction with eyes full of helpless rage. Amik stood beside Nataki, his jaw working. He was 18 winters old, strong and skilled, and utterly powerless to stop this. That impotence was written in every line of his body. "I should have fought," he said through clenched teeth. And died, Moppy replied. Is that what you want? To make me bury another child? Amik had lost 2 brothers to fever when he was young. He was the only son left, the last man in their family since their father's death. Moppy could not lose him too. At least it would mean something, Amik muttered. Dying means nothing if no one is left to remember, Moppy said sharply. You stay alive. You help your sisters survive. That is what means something. The fires burned through the morning. By noon there was nothing left but ash and blackened frames. The village that had stood for 100 years, maybe more, was gone, erased as if it had never been. People gathered at the edge of the ruins, 300 of them, maybe less. They carried bundles on their backs, children in their arms, the weight of their grief pressing down like physical loads. Some had horses pulling travois, but most would walk. Keme stood at the front, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He looked older than his 60 winters, aged by sorrow and responsibility. We go, he said simply. And they went. The first day of walking was not terrible. The path followed the river for a few miles before turning west into rolling hills covered with new grass. The weather was mild, the sky clear. Children ran ahead, treating it like an adventure, not yet understanding that this was exile, not exploration. Nataki walked with Ayana while Moppy and Amik pulled a small travois loaded with their bundles. They had left so much behind. What remained barely filled the travois, and Nataki felt the lightness as a kind of violation. Their lives reduced to this: a few baskets of food, some clothes, 2 blankets, a cooking pot, a knife. By evening, when they stopped to make camp, the adventure had worn off. Children were tired, crying, asking when they could go home. Adults set up rough shelters using blankets and sticks, built fires, prepared meager meals. There was no singing, no storytelling. People ate in silence and slept in silence, too exhausted for anything else. Nataki lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, staring up at stars that looked the same here as they did at home, but somehow felt different, colder, more distant. Beside her, Ayana whimpered in her sleep, a small sound of distress. Nataki pulled her closer and whispered the lullaby their grandmother used to sing, about the river and the fish and the reeds that grew in the shallows. The child quieted, soothed by the familiar melody, even in sleep. Tomorrow they would walk again, and the day after, and the day after that, 300 miles to a place they had never seen, where the government said they belonged, but which would never be home. Nataki closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. Instead, she listened to the sounds of the camp, snoring, crying, the crackle of dying fires, and wondered how many of them would survive the journey. Part 2. The Road of Sorrows. They walked for 2 weeks straight, stopping only to rest and eat and tend to the sick. The land changed around them, from the familiar hills of home to strange prairies that stretched endlessly in all directions, grass waving like water, the horizon so distant it seemed like the edge of the world. People began to fall ill, first the very old and very young, then others. A fever spread through the group, leaving people shivering and weak. They kept walking anyway, because stopping meant falling behind, and falling behind meant being left. An old woman died on the 5th day. They buried her beside the trail, wrapped in a blanket, marked with a cairn of stones. The shamans said prayers, brief and hurried, because they could not afford to linger. A child died on the 7th day, then another old man, then a woman in childbirth, and her baby with her. Each death was marked with stones, with prayers, with tears that dried quickly in the wind. And then they walked on, leaving the dead behind in unmarked graves in an unmarked land. Nataki felt herself growing numb to it, not because she did not care, but because caring too much would break her, and she could not afford to break. Not when Ayana needed her, when her mother needed her, when every step required a conscious choice to keep moving. On the 10th day they reached a river, not their river, but a different one, wider and faster, the water brown with silt. The crossing was treacherous. The current was strong, the bottom slippery with rocks. People linked arms and waded across, helping the children and elders, pulling the travois through water that came up to their waists. Halfway across, a young boy lost his footing. The current caught him, pulled him downstream. His mother screamed. Men dove after him, but the water was too fast, too powerful. They found his body a mile downriver, caught in some reeds, his small face peaceful as if sleeping. They buried him on the far bank and walked on. Amik changed during those weeks. The anger that had sustained him in the first days burned out, replaced by a hollow determination. He stopped talking except when necessary. He helped people cross rivers, carried children when their mothers could not, hunted when they passed through wooded areas, bringing back rabbits or birds that were divided among the families. Nataki watched him and worried. He was becoming hard, closed off, a thing of survival rather than a person. But she did not know how to reach him, how to bring him back. She was barely holding herself together. Mapi, meanwhile, seemed to grow stronger as the journey progressed. She walked with her back straight, her face calm, her hands always busy, tending the sick, comforting the grieving, organizing the evening camps. People began to come to her with problems, with fears, with questions. She became a kind of anchor for the group, steady when everything else was chaos. "How do you do it?" Nataki asked one night, watching her mother tend to a sick child. "Do what?" "Stay so calm, so strong." Mapi looked up from the child, her eyes tired but clear. "I am not calm. I am not strong. I am terrified every moment of every day. But if I show that terror, if I let it control me, then your sister will be terrified too.
And the people who look to me for guidance will lose hope. So I pretend. I pretend to be calm, to be strong, until the pretending becomes real enough to get through another day."
"Is that enough? Pretending?"
"It will have to be." The child began to cough, a wet, rattling sound. Mapi lifted her gently, holding her upright until the coughing subsided. The child's mother sat nearby, too exhausted to cry, her face a mask of despair.
"Rest,"
Mapi told her.
"I will watch her tonight." "I cannot ask." "You are not asking. I am offering. Rest." The woman nodded and curled up on the ground, asleep almost immediately. Mapi continued to hold the sick child, rocking slowly, humming a soft melody. Nataki watched and felt something shift inside her chest. Her mother was right. Pretending could become real. Strength could be built from nothing more than the decision to act strong. It was a fragile kind of power, but it was power nonetheless. She moved to sit beside her mother, taking the child into her own arms so Mapi could rest. The child was hot with fever, her breathing labored, but she quieted at the transfer, sinking into Nataki's embrace. "Thank you," Mapi said quietly. "I am only doing what you taught me." "Then I taught you well." They sat together through the night, passing the child back and forth when one of them grew tired, keeping vigil until dawn broke pale and cold over the endless prairie. The child survived. So did they. Another day, another mile, another small victory against the impossible. On the 15th day, they encountered another group. They appeared on the horizon like mirages wavering in the heat, a long line of people moving in the same direction, heading west toward the same designated territory. As the two groups drew closer, Nataki could see they were in worse shape than her own people, thinner, more ragged, fewer in number. The groups merged without ceremony, simply falling in together because there was safety in numbers, comfort in shared suffering. Nataki learned they were from a band that had lived 200 miles north,
displaced by the same decree, walking the same road of sorrows. They had lost more than half their people already. Fever, starvation, exposure, an attack by bandits who saw them as easy targets. The survivors were hollow-eyed and silent, moving like ghosts. That night, the combined group made camp together. The newcomers had little food, but shared what they had. Nataki's band did the same. It was not much, a handful of dried corn here, some smoked fish there. But shared, it became something like a meal. An old man from the northern band sat by Nataki's fire, accepting a bowl of thin soup with trembling hands. "How far have you come?" Mapi asked gently. 30 days' walk, maybe more. I have lost count." "And how many started with you?" 400. He sipped the soup, his eyes distant. "Now we are 90. The number hung in the air like smoke. 310 people dead in a month. Children, elders, men, women, erased from the world as if they had never existed. "I am sorry," Mapi said, inadequate but sincere. The old man nodded. "We all are. But sorry does not bring them back." No, it did not. Nothing would. They walked together now, a combined group of nearly 400 people, a ragged column stretching across the prairie like a wounded snake. The northern band's elder, a woman named Taki, joined Keme in leading the group. Together they made decisions, resolved disputes, kept people moving forward. Nataki found herself walking beside a girl from the northern band, close to her own age, maybe 20 winters. Her name was Liwanu, and she moved with a limp, her left leg dragging slightly with each step. "What happened?" Nataki asked, gesturing to the leg. "Fell crossing a river. Something sharp, rock or branch, I do not know. It became infected. My mother cleaned it as best she could, but it will not heal properly." "Can you walk?" "I can walk or I can die. Those are the choices." They walked in silence for a while, the sun beating down on their heads, the grass rustling around them like whispered warnings. "Do you think we will survive this?" Liwanu asked suddenly. Nataki did not answer immediately. Honesty warred with the need for hope. Finally, "Some of us will. But not all. No, not all." "I do not think I will be one of the ones who makes it." "Why not?" Liwanu gestured to her leg. "I am slowing down. Soon I will not be able to keep up. And when that happens, I will be left behind." "We will not leave you." "You will have to. You cannot carry me 300 miles. Nataki wanted to argue, to insist that they would find a way, that no one would be left behind. But she knew it was a lie. People were being left behind every day, the old who could not keep pace, the sick who could not recover, the injured who could not heal. It was cruel, but necessary. The group could not stop for everyone who fell. "Then we will make sure you do not fall," Nataki said finally. Liwanu looked at her, surprised. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Nataki said simply, "we are stronger together than apart. And I think we will need all the strength we can find." From that day on, Nataki walked beside Liwanu, matching her pace, helping her over rough ground, sharing her food and water. It slowed them both down, but Nataki found she did not care. There was something vital in this act of mutual support, something that made the journey bearable in a way that solitary survival could not. Others noticed. Amik began helping an old man from the northern band who could barely walk. Mapi took in a young mother whose baby had died, giving her something to care for again in the form of Ayana. Small acts of kindness rippled through the group, tying them together, making them more than just a collection of refugees. They became, improbably, a people. Part 3. The Long Crossing. The land changed again as they moved west. The prairie gave way to scrubland, dry and harsh, with sparse vegetation and little game. Water became scarce.
They walked past dried creek beds and dusty water holes, finding nothing. On the 23rd day, a child died of thirst. They had given him every drop they could spare, but it was not enough. His small body was buried beside the trail, another cairn of stones, another prayer whispered to uncaring skies. People began to despair. The promised territory was still weeks away, and they were running out of strength, out of supplies, out of hope. Fights broke out over trivial things: who got more water, who was carrying less weight, who was slowing the group down. Keme and Taki did their best to mediate, but even their authority was wearing thin. On the 25th day they found water, a small spring bubbling up from between rocks, creating a pool no larger than a cooking pot. It was barely enough, but they took turns sipping from it, filling their water skins, rationing carefully so everyone got at least a few swallows. That night, camped around the spring, Mapi called a gathering. "We are losing ourselves," she said bluntly. "We fight among ourselves, we despair, we forget who we are. This cannot continue."
"What would you have us do?" someone asked bitterly.
"Pretend this is not happening? Pretend we are not dying?"
"No, I would have us remember. Remember the stories, remember the songs, remember why we survive, not just to survive, but to carry our people forward. Our ancestors walked difficult paths before us. They endured, so will we."
"Our ancestors were not forced from their homes."
"Our ancestors faced many things," Mapi interrupted firmly. "Drought, famine, war, loss. Every generation has its trials. This is ours. But we are not less than those who came before. We are their children. We carry their strength in our blood. And we will endure, because that is what our people do." Silence followed her words. Then, slowly, people began to nod. An old woman began to sing, her voice thin but clear, one of the old songs about perseverance and hope. Others joined in, their voices blending, creating something beautiful from their collective pain. Nataki sang too, her voice joining her mother's, her sister's, her brother's. Liwanu beside her sang in a different language, but the melody was similar enough to harmonize. Around the fire, people from two different bands sang together, their distinctions melting in the music. It was a small thing, a fragile thing, but it mattered. In that moment, they were not just refugees fleeing a broken promise. They were a people with a history, a culture, a reason to continue. The singing went on late into the night, and when people finally slept, they slept a little more peacefully, a little more connected to something larger than their individual suffering. The next morning, they found tracks. Amik spotted them first, hoof prints in the dust, too many to count, heading roughly in the same direction they were traveling. Fresh, maybe a day old. "Soldiers?" someone asked nervously. "Maybe, or traders, or settlers. Should we avoid them?" Keme and Taki conferred quietly, then shook their heads. "We continue on our path. If they are soldiers, avoiding them will only make us look guilty of something. And if they are traders, we may be able to barter for supplies." So they followed the tracks, wary and tense, and by midday they saw the source. A wagon train, 15 wagons pulled by horses and oxen, moving slowly across the scrubland. The wagons stopped when they saw the approaching group. Men with rifles appeared, standing guard, their faces suspicious. But they did not shoot. They waited. Keme approached alone, his hands visible and empty, his posture non-threatening. He spoke to the wagon leader, a tall white man with a thick beard and eyes that had seen too much sun. Nataki could not hear the conversation from where she stood with the main group, but she saw Keme gesture back toward his people, saw the wagon leader nod slowly, saw money change hands. When Keme returned, he carried a sack of cornmeal and some dried beef. "They are traders," he said, "heading west to the mining territories. They sold us these for the silver we had left."
"That is all they would give us for all our silver?"
Chayton demanded angrily. "They know we are desperate. They charge accordingly."
It was theft, essentially, taking advantage of people in dire circumstances, but there was nothing to be done about it. They took the food and divided it carefully, making it stretch as far as possible. That night, Nataki watched the wagon train's fires in the distance and felt a deep bitterness settle in her chest. Those people were heading west by choice, seeking fortune, building new lives. Her people were heading west by force, seeking only survival, their old lives destroyed. The injustice of it was staggering. But rage required energy she did not have to spare. So she swallowed it down, added it to the weight she already carried, and tried to sleep. On the 30th day, they reached a river, a real river, wide and deep with a strong current. It was the last major barrier before the designated territory. Cross this, and they were almost there. But crossing it would not be easy. The water was high from spring runoff, the current swift and dangerous. There was no bridge, no ferry, no easy way across. They camped on the bank while Keme and Taki scouted for a crossing point. They found a place where the river widened and shallowed slightly, creating a ford that might be passable. "We cross tomorrow at first light," Keme announced, "when the water is coldest and people are most alert. Everyone links together. No one crosses alone." That night, people prepared as best they could, waterproofing bundles, tying precious items high on their bodies, saying prayers to the river spirits. Nataki sat with her family, checking and rechecking their bundles. Ayana was frightened, clinging to Mapi with wide eyes. "I cannot swim," the child whispered. "You will not need to," Mapi assured her. "I will carry you. You will be safe." But looking at the dark water rushing past, Nataki was not sure any of them would be safe. They entered the water at dawn, when the light was grey and uncertain. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing breath, numbing limbs. People gasped and cried out, but kept moving, linked arm in arm, forming a human chain across the current. The water rose quickly, to their knees, their waists, their chests. The current pulled at them, trying to sweep them away. Children screamed, elders prayed. Young men and women planted their feet and held on, refusing to be moved. Halfway across, a woman lost her footing. The current took her instantly, ripping her from the chain. People lunged after her, but she was gone, swept downstream, her screams cut off abruptly when her head went under. They kept moving, had to keep moving. To stop was to die. Nataki held Liwanu with one arm and Ayana with the other, her muscles screaming with effort, her feet slipping on the rocky bottom. Beside her, Amik anchored them, his strength keeping them from being swept away. Step by step, inch by inch, they crossed. When Nataki's feet finally found shallow water, when she pulled herself and her burdens up onto the far bank, she collapsed in the mud, gasping, shaking with cold and exhaustion. Around her, others were doing the same. Coughing, crying, thanking the spirits, searching frantically for family members. 3 people had been lost to the river, a woman, an old man, and a child. Their bodies would never be recovered, never buried properly, never mourned as they deserved. But the rest had made it. Against all odds, the rest had crossed. They built fires and dried themselves, and tried to find warmth in their soaked clothes and frozen limbs. And when they had recovered enough to move, they stood and walked on, leaving the river behind, carrying its dead with them in memory, if not in body. Part 4. The Promised Land. 2 days later, they reached the edge of the designated territory. It was not what they had been promised. The agent had described good land, fertile soil, plenty of water, game in the forests. What they found was a barren expanse of rocky ground with sparse vegetation, a thin creek that would dry up by summer, and no sign of game anywhere. People stood at the boundary marker, a wooden post driven into the ground with Indian Territory painted on it in white letters, and stared in disbelief. "This is it?" Chayton said. "This is what we walked 300 miles for?"
Kemi's face was grim. Apparently. We cannot survive here. There is nothing. Then we will make something from nothing. They walked into the territory, spreading out across the barren land, searching for the best place to settle. What they found was a shallow valley with some protection from wind and access to the creek. It was not much, but it was what they had. They began to build. Without wood for lodges, they built earth houses, partially underground structures with roofs of sod and walls of mud brick. It was back-breaking work, digging into the hard ground, hauling rocks, shaping mud. But they worked together, helping each other, and slowly a village began to take shape. The Taki worked alongside Liwanu, digging trenches for walls, carrying rocks, shaping mud bricks with their hands. Her back ached. Her hands blistered and bled. But she kept working, because what else was there to do? Stop and starve? Amik and the other young men hunted, ranging far from the settlement in search of game. They came back with rabbits, prairie dogs, occasionally a deer. It was not enough to feed everyone well, but it kept them from starving. Mapi organized the women into groups: gatherers, cooks, builders, teachers.
She created structure where there was chaos, purpose where there was despair. People followed her leadership naturally, grateful for someone who seemed to know what to do. Weeks passed. The village grew. Earth houses rose from the ground like strange mushrooms clustered around the creek. Gardens were planted, though the soil was poor and no one expected much yield. A council house was built, larger than the others, with space for meetings. They were surviving. Barely, but surviving. Then the agent arrived. He rode in on a fine horse, dressed in clean clothes, his face showing no signs of the hardship that marked every face in the village. Behind him came 2 soldiers, rifles across their saddles, watching the villagers with flat, suspicious eyes. Keme and Taki met him at the edge of the settlement. Nataki watched from a distance, Ayana beside her, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. The agent spoke for several minutes. Keme's face grew darker with each word. Finally, the agent handed him a paper, tipped his hat mockingly, and rode away with his escorts. When Keme returned to the council house, his hands were shaking with rage. "What did he say?" Taki asked. Keme held up the paper. "He says we are to send our children to the mission school, 50 miles east. They will be educated in the white ways, taught to be civilized. If we refuse, our rations will be cut." "Rations?" Mapi said sharply. "What rations? We have received nothing." "Exactly." "He says rations will begin next month. Flour, beef, blankets. But only if we comply. If we send the children." The council erupted. People shouted, argued, demanded to know how the agent could ask this of them after everything they had already lost. But Nataki noticed something. Keme was not arguing. He was just standing there, the paper in his hands, his face a mask of defeat. "We cannot send them," Takuin, one of the elders, said firmly. "The children are all we have left. They carry our language, our stories. If we give them to the missionaries, we lose everything." "If we do not, we starve," someone else countered. "The hunting is poor. The crops will fail. Without those rations, we will not survive the winter." "Then we hunt more. We work harder." "There is nothing to hunt. The land is empty." The argument went on for hours, going in circles, everyone knowing what needed to be said but no one wanting to say it. Finally, Mapi stood. "We will not send the children," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We have lost our land," Mapi continued. "We have lost our homes, our dead, our past. But we have not lost ourselves. Not yet. If we give them our children, if we let them take the next generation and remake them in the image of those who destroyed us, then we truly have nothing left. We might as well have died on the walk here. But the rations, we will survive without them. We have survived worse. We will teach our children ourselves. We will preserve our language.
our ways. And if that means we go hungry, so be it. At least we go hungry as ourselves, not as the shadows of what they want us to be." Silence followed her words. Then, slowly, people began to nod. Even those who had argued for compliance seemed swayed by her passion, her certainty. "Then it is decided," Keme said heavily. "No children go to the mission. We survive on our own terms." The decision made, people returned to their homes. But Nataki saw the fear in their eyes, heard it in their whispers. They had chosen pride over survival. Whether that was bravery or foolishness, only time would tell. Part 5. Winter's Trial. The agent returned a month later, as promised, but without rations. He barely looked at them before riding away, his message clear. You made your choice. Now live with it. Summer faded into autumn. The crops they had planted yielded almost nothing. A few stunted corn stalks, some withered squash. The hunting remained poor. People began to ration food more severely, giving more to the children and less to themselves. By the time the first snow fell, they were already weak. And the winter was brutal. It came early and stayed late, bringing howling winds and snow that piled up to the roofs of their earth houses. The creek froze solid. Game disappeared entirely. People huddled in their shelters, burning whatever they could find for heat, eating less and less each day. Children cried from hunger. Elders grew quiet and still, conserving energy. Women boiled bones over and over, extracting every trace of nutrition, making soup from snow and hope. Nataki watched Ayana grow thinner, watched the light fade from her eyes, watched her become listless and silent. She gave the child every scrap of food she could spare, but it was never enough. "Why are we hungry?" Ayana asked one night, her voice small and weak. "Because the winter is hard," Nataki said, trying to keep her voice steady. "When will it end?" "Soon. Spring will come soon." But spring felt impossibly distant, a dream from another lifetime. People began to die. An elder here, a child there, their bodies too weak to fight the cold and hunger. Each death was marked with prayers, but there was no energy for elaborate ceremonies. They wrapped the bodies in whatever cloth they had and buried them in shallow graves in the frozen ground, promising to do better when spring came. If spring came. The first to die was an old man named Chaski, who had been a great hunter in his youth but had grown frail during the journey. He died quietly one night, simply closing his eyes and not opening them again. His wife of 40 years sat beside his body until morning, singing softly, her voice cracking on the old songs. Then a child, no more than 3 winters, who had been sick since the river crossing. Her mother tried everything, heated stones to warm her, broth forced between her lips, prayers to every spirit she could name. But the child slipped away anyway, her small body giving up the fight. The mother's grief was terrible to witness, a keening wail that echoed through the settlement for hours. More followed. 2 elders in 1 week. A young woman who had given birth during the journey, her body never recovering, finally succumbing to infection and exhaustion. A teenage boy who had gone out to gather firewood and hadn't returned. His frozen body found 3 days later, half buried in a snowdrift. Each death diminished them, not just in numbers, but in spirit. The weight of loss became physical, pressing down on everyone, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to believe there was any point in continuing. Nataki watched it all with a growing numbness. She tended the sick when she could, helped prepare the dead for burial, comforted the grieving. But inside, she felt hollow. How much more could they endure? How many more losses before there was nothing left? One night, holding Ayana as the child slept fitfully, burning with fever, Nataki made a decision. If her sister died,
If the fever took her as it had taken so many others, Nataki would not survive it. She would simply stop. Stop eating, stop drinking, stop trying. Let the cold and hunger do their work. But in the morning, Ayana's fever broke. The child opened her eyes, clear and lucid for the first time in days, and asked for water. Nataki gave it to her with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face, and felt something shift inside her chest. Life was insisting on continuing. Even here, even now, life fought to persist. And if a child could fight, then so could she. She ate that morning, for the first time in 3 days, forcing down the thin gruel that was their only food. It tasted like ash and disappointment, but she swallowed it anyway. Survival, she realized, was not about wanting to live. It was about choosing to live, over and over, even when death seemed easier. Around her, others were making the same choice. Amik went out hunting despite the cold, despite the poor chances. Mapi gathered the women to sing, to remind themselves they were still a people, still capable of beauty. Keme called council meetings to discuss spring planting, as if spring was a certainty, as if they would all be there to see it. These small acts of defiance against despair became their salvation, not because they guaranteed survival, but because they made survival possible, worth attempting, worth fighting for. When Kuruk arrived, he found a community on the edge of breaking, but still holding on. His hunting skills, his meat, gave them just enough, not abundance, not comfort, but enough. Enough to keep hope alive a little longer. On the darkest night of winter, when hope seems truly lost, a stranger arrived. He came on foot, moving through the snow like a ghost, and collapsed outside Keme's earth house. People found him in the morning, half frozen, barely alive. They brought him inside, wrapped him in blankets, forced warm broth between his lips. Slowly, over hours, he thawed and regained consciousness. His name was Kuruk, and he was from a band that had once lived near Nataki's people, before the displacement. He had been traveling alone for weeks, searching for survivors, for any remnant of his people. "I heard there were people here," he said weakly. "I thought maybe my sister, my nephew." "What were their names?" Mapi asked gently. He told her. She shook her head. "I am sorry. They are not here." Kuruk's face crumpled. He had walked all this way through snow and cold and danger, searching for family that did not exist, chasing hope that had died long ago. But instead of leaving, he stayed. He recovered his strength over the next few days, and then he began to help. He was a skilled hunter and tracker, better than anyone in the village. He went out in the worst weather and came back with rabbits, sometimes a deer, once a wild turkey. The meat saved lives, not many, but enough. Enough to keep hope alive a little longer. Nataki found herself watching him, this stranger who had lost everything and yet kept giving. He moved with a quiet efficiency, spoke little, but his actions were loud. He was doing what needed to be done, not because he had to, but because he could. One night, she found him sitting outside his earth house, staring at the stars. "You should be inside," she said. "It is too cold out here." "I am used to cold." She sat beside him anyway, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. "Why do you help us? We are not your people." "All survivors are my people now," he said simply. "We are all that is left." "You could have kept walking, found another band, another place." "I could have. But where would I walk to? Everywhere is the same now. Everywhere is loss. At least here, I can make the loss mean something. I can keep people alive. That is worth staying for." Nataki understood. She had felt the same thing, working to keep Liwanu on her feet, caring for Ayana, helping her mother. The purpose was fragile and small, but it was something to hold on to when everything else had been taken. "Thank you," she said, "for the hunting, for staying." Kuruk nodded, but said nothing. They sat in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Two people among many, trying to survive the unsurvivable. Winter finally broke in the 3rd month. The snow began to melt, the creek thawed, and green shoots appeared in the mud. People emerged from their earth houses, blinking in the sunlight, counting who remained. They had lost 40 people over the winter, 40 out of 400. 10% of their population gone to cold and hunger and disease. But 360 remained. 360 who had endured, who had survived. They buried the winter dead properly now, with full ceremonies, with songs and prayers and tears. They built cairns and planted seedlings over the graves, making a place of memory and honor. And then they turned to the work of rebuilding. Gardens needed to be planted, houses needed repair, children needed teaching, life needed to continue. Nataki threw herself into the work, trying to outrun the grief that threatened to consume her. She planted seeds with Liwanu, who had survived the winter but whose leg had worsened, the infection never quite healing. She taught Ayana the songs their grandmother had taught her, making sure the child knew the words, the meanings, the history. She helped Mapi organize the women into work groups, finding purpose in the structure. Kuruk stayed, becoming part of the community, part of their collective effort to survive. He hunted, he helped build, he sat on the council when his input was needed. He was quiet but reliable, and people came to depend on him. And slowly, imperceptibly, Nataki found her eyes following him when he moved through the village, found herself listening for his voice in council meetings, found herself seeking his company in the evenings, sitting beside him in comfortable silence, sharing the weight of their separate sorrows. She did not know what it meant, did not have the energy to examine it too closely, but it was there, a small warmth in the cold, a possibility in the darkness. Part 6. New Roots. Spring brought not just warmth but visitors. Other displaced bands, hearing of the settlement, began to arrive. They came in small groups, 5 people here, 10 there, refugees from the same forced exodus, survivors of the same trail of tears. The settlement grew. Earth houses were built for the newcomers, gardens expanded. A second council house was constructed to accommodate the larger population. With the growth came new skills, new knowledge. One group brought seeds for crops that grew well in poor soil. Another brought techniques for capturing and storing rainwater. An old woman arrived who knew healing herbs that grew in this region, could treat infections and fevers with local plants. The settlement was becoming something more than a place to wait out death. It was becoming a community, a people being reborn from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Mapi was at the center of it all, organizing, mediating, leading. She was elected to the council formally, the first woman to hold such a position in their tradition. But the traditions were changing, adapting to new realities. Women had always held power in the home. Now that power was being recognized publicly. Nataki was proud of her mother, but also worried. Mapi was working herself to exhaustion, never resting, always giving. She was in her 50s now, not young, and the years of hardship had taken their toll.
"You need to slow down," Nataki told her one evening. "I will rest when the work is done. The work is never done. Then I will never rest."
Mapi smiled, but it did not reach her eyes.
"Someone has to keep things moving forward. Someone has to believe we can build something here. Others can help. Let them. They do help, but I am good at this, at organizing, at leading. It gives me purpose. Purpose is good. Burning yourself out is not."
Mapi sighed and sat down heavily on a bench outside her house.
"You sound like your grandmother."
"Good. Someone should." They sat in silence, watching the settlement's evening routines, fires being lit, meals being prepared, children playing in the last of the daylight. It looked almost normal. almost like a real village instead of a collection of desperate refugees.
We did this,
Mapi said quietly.
We survived something that should have killed us, and we built something new. That matters.
Yes, Nataki agreed.
It does.
Summer came, and with it the crops they had planted began to grow. Not abundantly, but enough. Corn, beans, squash, the three sisters of their tradition, adapted to new soil. The harvest would not be large, but it would be something. Kuruk led hunting parties into the surrounding territories, ranging farther and farther in search of game. They found buffalo, small herds that had been missed by the white hunters. The meat and hides were brought back and divided among the families, and for the first time in over a year, people ate well. A celebration was called, a feast with dancing and singing and stories. It was small compared to the festivals of the old days, but it felt monumental. A declaration that they were still alive, still a people, still capable of joy. Nataki danced with Ayana, spinning the child until she laughed breathlessly, her face flushed with happiness. Amik drummed, his hands finding the old rhythms, his face relaxed for the first time in months. Mapi sang, her voice joining others in harmonies that echoed across the valley. And Kuruk watched from the edge of the firelight, not dancing, but present, his eyes finding Nataki's across the flames. When their eyes met, he smiled, just slightly, just enough. And Nataki felt something flutter in her chest, something that might have been hope, or might have been the beginning of something else entirely. After the dancing, when the fire had burned down to coals and people were drifting to their homes, Kuruk approached her. "Walk with me?" he asked. They walked along the creek, away from the settlement, into the quiet darkness. The moon was full, painting everything silver. Water burbled over stones, eternal and uncaring. The path beside the creek was rough, worn down by countless trips to fetch water, by children playing, by people seeking solitude. Nataki had walked this path hundreds of times since they had arrived, but tonight it felt different, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure.
I am glad you stayed,
Nataki said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them.
I am glad you let me.
You do not need our permission.
Perhaps not, but it is good to be wanted, not just tolerated.
They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps soft on the packed earth, their breath visible in the cold air. Nataki was intensely aware of him beside her, his height, his warmth, the quiet strength he carried like a cloak. She thought about what to say, how to articulate the feeling that had been growing inside her. It was not love, exactly. She was not sure she was capable of love anymore, not the way she had loved her first husband, before the displacement, before the deaths, before the world had broken. But it was something. Connection, maybe. Recognition. The sense of finding someone who understood the weight she carried without her having to explain it. Before she could find the words, Kuruk spoke. I lost my wife in the displacement, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. And my daughter. They died in the first week. Fever. My wife went first. She was strong. I thought if anyone could survive, she would. But the fever took her in 2 days. She burned and shivered and called for water we did not have. And then she was gone. Nataki felt her throat tighten but said nothing, letting him continue. My daughter was 5 winters old. Her name was Sixi. She had my wife's eyes and my stubbornness. She cried when her mother died, but she tried to be brave, tried to keep walking. But 3 days later the fever took her too. I held her while she died, held her while she burned, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. He stopped walking, and Nataki stopped with him. In the moonlight she could see tears on his face, silent and steady. I buried them both beside the trail, he continued. Shallow graves, no proper ceremony. I marked the spot with stones and promised I would come back, would give them a real burial. But I knew even then it was a lie. I would never find that place again. They were lost forever, not just dead, but gone, erased, as if they had never existed.
They existed,
Nataki said firmly.
You remember them. That means they existed.
Memory is not enough.
It is all we have.
Kuruk turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw a depth of pain that matched her own. I kept walking because I did not know what else to do. I thought if I could find my sister, my nephew, I would have a reason to continue, someone to protect, someone to live for. But they are gone too. Everyone is gone. My whole family, my whole world, just gone.
Not everyone,
Nataki said, stepping closer.
We are here.
Yes, you are. He reached out, hesitant, and touched her face gently, as if afraid she might disappear. And that matters more than I can say. When I found this place, I thought I would stay a few days, rest, and move on. But then I saw how hard everyone was working to build something from nothing. I saw your mother organizing, your brother hunting, you taking care of that girl with a bad leg. I saw people refusing to give up, and I thought maybe I should stop giving up too.
So you stayed?
So I stayed. And now I think maybe there is a reason to continue after all. Not the reason I was looking for, but a reason nonetheless. Nataki felt her heart beating fast, felt the flutter of something she had thought dead, hope, possibility, the idea that life might hold more than just survival.
What reason?
Kuruk stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face, could see every line of grief and endurance etched into his features. You, he said simply. If you will have me. I know I am broken. I know I carry more grief than any person should. But I also know that you carry the same weight. And maybe together it becomes bearable. Maybe we can build something new from our broken pieces. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more honest than that. A recognition of shared damage, of two people who had lost everything finding, perhaps, the beginning of something in each other. Nataki thought about her past, about the life she had lost, about the husband who had died so long ago she could barely remember his face, only the feeling of safety he had provided. That life was gone. That safety was gone. That person she had been, young and hopeful and believing the world was fundamentally good, was gone. But she was still here, still alive, still capable of feeling something other than grief.
Yes,
she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes.
I will have you. Not because I think you can make me whole again. I do not think either of us will ever be whole. But because I think we can be broken together. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that is all anyone can ask for now.
They stood together in the moonlight, not touching yet, but close enough to feel each other's warmth, and Nataki felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, she was not healed, might never be healed, but something like the beginning of peace. Part 7. What We Carry. They were married in the autumn, in a ceremony that blended old traditions with new realities. There was no elaborate feast, no expensive gifts, but there was community, witnesses, blessings from the elders. Mapi cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Her daughter was settling, finding stability, building a future. Amik stood beside Kuruk as a witness, accepting him into the family with a firm handshake and a rare smile. Ayana danced at the ceremony, her happiness pure and uncomplicated. She adored Kuruk, had adopted him as a father figure almost immediately, following him around the settlement, asking endless questions about hunting and tracking and survival. Liwanu was there too, sitting because standing for long periods was now impossible. The infection in her leg had spread, and the healers said it was only a matter of time before it took her life. But she was there, smiling, celebrating her friend's happiness even as her own life dimmed. After the ceremony, Naraki sat beside her.
Thank you for coming. I would not miss it.
Liwanu's voice was weak, but her eyes were bright.
You deserve this. You deserve happiness. So do you. I had my happiness. Before all this, I had a family, a home, a life. It is gone now, but I had it. That is more than many can say.
Naraki felt tears prick her eyes.
You will get better. The healers know. I know. It is all right, Naraki. I am not afraid. I am afraid to lose you.
Liwanu reached out and took her hand.
You will not lose me. I will be in your memory, in the stories you tell, in the pattern of the baskets you make. That is how we survive, not through our bodies, but through what we pass on.
They sat in silence, holding hands. Two women who had walked through hell together and emerged on the other side, changed but unbroken. Liwanu died 2 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep. They buried her on the hillside overlooking the settlement, wrapped in a blanket Mapi had woven, her favorite possessions tucked around her. Nataki sang the funeral songs and wept openly, mourning not just a friend, but everything they had lost together and survived together. Winter came again, but this time they were prepared. Stores of food, warm clothes, sturdy houses. The season was still hard, but it did not kill them. They survived, and that was its own kind of victory. In the spring, Nataki discovered she was pregnant. The news spread through the settlement like fire, celebrated as a sign of hope, of continuity. A child born in this new place, a new generation. Mapi was overjoyed, already planning, already preparing. Amik carved a cradle board, beautiful and intricate, from wood he had traveled 3 days to find. Kuruk became even more devoted, hunting extra to make sure Nataki ate well, building additions to their house to make room for the baby. But Nataki herself felt conflicted. Joy at the new life, yes, but also fear. Fear that she would fail this child the way their people had been failed. Fear that the world had nothing to offer a new generation except more suffering. She shared these fears with her mother one evening, sitting outside while Mapi ground corn.
I am afraid,
she admitted.
Afraid to bring a child into this world.
Mapi's hands stilled.
I was afraid too, when I was pregnant with you.
The times were uncertain even then. There was sickness, raids, hunger. I thought, what right do I have to bring a child into such hardship?
What changed your mind?
Nothing changed my mind. I was still afraid when you were born, still afraid when your brothers were born, when Amik was born, when Ayana was born. Fear does not go away just because we want it to. But I had you anyway, because life continues whether we are afraid or not. And you, all of you, have brought me more joy than I could have imagined. Even in the worst times, even in the darkest moments, my children were the light that kept me going.
But what if I fail? What if I cannot protect them?
You will fail sometimes. All parents do. But you will also succeed sometimes. You will teach them, love them, give them tools to survive. That is all anyone can do. Nataki placed her hand on her belly, feeling the small life growing inside.
I want them to have better than this. Better than earth houses and poor crops and memories of displacement.
Then you will work to give them better. And if you cannot give them better, you will give them strong enough to make better for themselves. That is how change happens. One generation teaching the next, each one building on what came before. It was not a perfect answer, but it was honest. and in its honesty, Nataki found some comfort. The baby was born in early summer, a daughter, small but healthy. They named her Epony, which meant butterfly, because Mapi said she was a transformation, a symbol of change and beauty emerging from darkness. The birth had been difficult. Nataki had labored through a full day and night, the pain coming in waves that threatened to drown her. Mapi had attended her, along with 2 other women skilled in midwifery, and their presence had been the only thing that kept Nataki from surrendering to panic. "Breathe," Mapi had commanded, her voice cutting through the pain. "You have survived worse than this. You can survive this, too." And she had. When the baby finally emerged, slippery and screaming, Nataki had wept with relief and exhaustion and a joy so fierce it frightened her. This tiny creature, so fragile and perfect, represented everything they had fought for: the future, continuation, hope. Kuruk had been waiting outside, pacing frantically, and when Mapi brought him in to meet his daughter, he had stood frozen for a long moment, just staring. Then he had reached out with trembling hands, and Mapi had placed Epony in his arms. "I thought I would never have this again," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking on every word. "I thought that part of my life was over, forever." "You have it now," Nataki said from where she lay, exhausted but watching. "We have it now. This is real. This is ours." Kuruk had nodded, unable to speak, cradling the baby as if she were made of glass, as if she might disappear if he held her too loosely. He sat beside Nataki's bed, and they looked at their daughter together, this miracle they had created. And for the first time in years, the future seemed like something to anticipate rather than dread. The settlement celebrated the birth as they had celebrated the harvest, with singing and feasting and stories. Food was brought to Nataki's house: meat, vegetables, bread made from the precious flour stores, everyone contributing what they could to welcome this new life. Epony became everyone's child, passed from arms to arms, blessed by the elders with prayers in the old language, welcomed into the community with ceremonies that blended tradition with adaptation. The women sang her the welcoming songs, the men carved her a cradle board from precious wood, and even the youngest children brought gifts: small stones, interesting leaves, whatever treasures they possessed. In the weeks that followed, Nataki learned the rhythms of new motherhood all over again. She had raised Ayana, but that felt like a lifetime ago, and everything was different now. She was different, older, more tired, marked by years of hardship. But she was also stronger in some ways, more certain of what mattered. She nursed Epony through long nights, walking circles around her house when the baby would not settle, singing the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. Kuruk helped when he could, taking the baby so Nataki could sleep, learning to soothe her cries with the same patient determination he brought to hunting. Ayana was enchanted, begging constantly to hold her niece, promising to teach her everything, to be the best aunt possible. She was 15 now, on the cusp of womanhood herself, and the responsibility of helping care for Epony seemed to accelerate her maturation. She learned to change the baby, to recognize the different cries, to help prepare food when Nataki was too exhausted. Amik carves toys from wood, delicate little figures of animals, a deer, a rabbit, a bird with outstretched wings. They were beautiful, intricate, works of art that would one day fill Epony's hands, but that now hung above her cradleboard, turning gently in the breeze. Mapi was overjoyed, transformed by grandmotherhood into something even more vital than before. She had lost so much: her husband, her sons, her home, her past. But this baby represented something salvaged from the wreckage. A thread of continuity running forward, proof that life could continue despite everything. "She has your eyes," Mapi said one day, holding Epony and looking into her tiny face. "And Kuruk's determination. I can already see it. She will be strong. She will have to be. I want her to have more than strength. Nataki said.
I want her to have joy, peace, things we have not had. Then you will work to give her those things.
And what you cannot give her, you will teach her to find for herself. That is all any parent can do. Watching her family gather around this new life, watching the community celebrate and support and embrace Aponi as their collective future, Nataki felt something break open inside her chest. Not pain, but its opposite. Joy. Pure and uncomplicated and almost forgotten, but real, undeniable, burning bright against the darkness that had surrounded them for so long. They had survived. Against impossible odds, they had survived, and now they were creating new life, new hope, new possibilities. It was not the life they had planned or wanted. It was not the world their ancestors had known, but it was theirs, built from ashes and tears and stubborn refusal to disappear. That night, lying beside Kuruk with Aponi sleeping between them, Nataki whispered a prayer to the ancestors she had lost, to the land they had left behind, to the river that had forgotten them.
We remember you, she said. We carry you with us, and we will teach our children to remember too. That is how you live on. That is how we survive.
The baby stirred, making small sounds, and Nataki soothed her back to sleep, her hand gentle on the small head. Outside, the wind moved through the valley, carrying with it the promise of morning, of another day, of continuation. They had lost so much, but they had not lost everything. Not yet. Part 8. The circle continues. Years passed, measured in seasons, in harvests, in children born and elders who died peacefully in their sleep. The settlement grew into a village, the village into a small town. More displaced people arrived, and each time they were welcomed, integrated, given a place to belong. Nataki watched Aponi grow from baby to child to young woman, strong and curious and unafraid. The transformation was gradual but miraculous. First the small fist opening to grasp a finger, then the first smile, the first word, the first steps that turned into running before Nataki could blink. She taught her daughter the old stories, the old songs, the old patterns for weaving. They would sit together in the evenings, hands busy with reeds or thread, while Nataki recited the tales her own grandmother had told her. Stories about how the world was made, about trickster spirits and animal helpers, about the importance of reciprocity and respect. "Why did Raven steal the sun?" Aponi would ask, her small face serious. "Because the world was dark and cold, and the people were suffering. Raven saw their pain and decided to help, even though it was dangerous. Was he afraid? Very afraid, but he did it anyway. That is what bravery is, being afraid, but acting anyway, because the need is greater than the fear." Aponi would nod thoughtfully, absorbing this, weaving it into her understanding of how the world worked. And Nataki would watch her daughter's face and feel a fierce protectiveness, a determination that Aponi would know these stories, would carry them forward, would not lose this essential part of herself no matter what else changed. But she also taught her daughter new things, how to survive in this harsh land, how to read the weather by watching the clouds and the way grass bent in the wind, how to find water by following animal tracks or noticing the green of vegetation, how to negotiate with the agents who came periodically with papers and demands, how to smile and nod while revealing nothing important, how to protect what mattered while appearing to comply. "Why do we have to pretend?" Aponi asked once, when she was perhaps 10 winters old, after watching her mother deal with an agent who wanted to count their population, assess their resources. "Because," Nataki said carefully, "they have power we do not have. They have soldiers, weapons, the authority of their government. If we fight them openly, we lose. But if we appear to cooperate, while actually maintaining our own ways,
we survive. It is a different kind of resistance. It feels like lying. It is lying. But sometimes lying is how you protect the truth.
Aponi considered this, her young face troubled.
Grandmother Mapi says lying is wrong. Your grandmother is right. Lying is wrong. But so is taking people's land, forcing them to move, trying to erase their culture.
We live in a world where many things are wrong. We do what we must to survive those wrongs while holding on to what is right. These were complicated lessons for a child, but Nataki knew Aponi needed to learn them. The world would not be gentle with her. She needed to be strong, adaptable, smart enough to navigate between cultures while maintaining her identity. It was a delicate balance, and Nataki worried constantly that she was not teaching it well enough. But watching Aponi grow, watching her learn the old language from Ayana while also learning English from traders, watching her help in the gardens while also learning to read from the few books they possessed, Nataki began to believe her daughter would be all right. More than all right. She would be someone who could move between worlds with grace, taking the best from each while compromising neither. When Aponi was 12, she asked about the displacement. "Tell me about the home we left," she said. "The one before this place, the one with the river." Nataki had been expecting this question for years, had dreaded it and prepared for it in equal measure. She sat down with her daughter, Kuruk, beside them, and began to speak. "The river was wide and clear," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion rising in her throat. "It ran past our village, singing always, a voice that never stopped. We lived in lodges made of saplings and bark, traditional style, beautiful and well made. Our gardens grew tall with corn, beans, squash. The fish were abundant. The hunting was good. We were happy there. What happened? The settlers came. They wanted our land. It was good land, fertile, near water. So their government drew lines on paper and said the land was theirs now. We were told to leave." "And you left?" "Yes, because the alternative was to be forced out by soldiers, to watch our people be killed. So we burned our own homes, packed what we could carry, and walked away." Aponi was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "Were you angry?" "I was furious. I am still furious, sometimes. But anger alone does not help, so I channel it into other things, into building this place, into teaching you, into making sure we survive and remember. That is how anger becomes useful." "I wish I could have seen it, the old place." "So do I, but it is gone now. What remains is the memory, and the memory is what we carry forward. As long as we remember, as long as we tell the stories, that place exists. Not physically, but in our hearts, in our culture. That is enough. It has to be." Kuruk spoke then, his voice quiet. "I never saw your mother's original home. I come from a different place, also taken, also destroyed. But I have heard her stories so many times that I can almost see it. The river, the lodges, the gardens. And one day you will tell these stories to your children, and they will see it too. That is how we keep it alive." Aponi nodded slowly, and Nataki saw something shift in her daughter's face. A deepening, a maturation. The moment when a child begins to understand the weight of history and her place in it. "I will remember," Aponi said seriously. "I will tell my children, and they will tell theirs. The river will not be forgotten." "No," Nataki agreed, pulling her daughter close. "It will not." Mapi grew old gracefully, her hair pure white now, her face a map of wrinkles earned through hardship and joy in equal measure. She stepped back from leadership gradually, allowing younger voices to guide the community, but her wisdom was still sought, her counsel still valued. Amik married and had children of his own,
3 sons who grew tall and strong, learning to hunt from their father and Kuruk, learning to farm from their grandmother, learning the old ways even as they invented new ones. Ayana became a teacher, gathering the children each day to pass on language and tradition. She was fierce about this work, refusing to let the missionaries take even one child, arguing passionately in council meetings that their identity depended on controlling their own education. Kuruk remained steady, a quiet presence at Nataki's side through everything. They had more children, 2 sons, another daughter, and raised them together with a pony, creating a family that was both traditional and entirely new. But the outside world kept encroaching. Settlers moved closer. Mines opened in the surrounding hills. Railroads were planned, routes drawn across lands the government had promised would remain indigenous forever. The promises, as always, were broken. When Aponi was 15, the agent came with new papers. The territory was being reduced again. They would have to move to an even smaller area, even more barren, to make room for white settlement. The community was devastated. Move again? After everything they had built? After all the years of work and sacrifice? "We could fight," Amik said in the council meeting. He was in his 40s now, still strong, still angry. "And lose," Mapi replied. She was nearly 70, her voice thin but clear. "We cannot win a war against them. We have tried resistance before. It ends in blood." "Then what? We just accept this, again and again, forever?" "We accept what we must, and we resist how we can." "How? By moving peacefully? By doing what they say?" "By surviving. By keeping our children alive, our language alive, our ways alive. That is resistance. That is how we win. By refusing to disappear, no matter how many times they try to erase us." The argument went on for days. The community split between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to comply. But in the end, pragmatism won. They could not fight an army. They could not win against rifles and cannons and the full weight of a government that saw them as obstacles to be removed. So they prepared to move. Again. Nataki was 40 years old when they left the settlement. Old enough to remember 2 displacements now. Old enough to know the pattern would probably continue until there was nowhere left to move. But she had also learned something through the years, that home was not a place, but a people. The earth houses they left behind were just structures. What mattered was the community, the connections, the shared memory and purpose. They walked west again, a smaller distance this time, only 50 miles. The new territory was rocky and dry, with little vegetation and less water. But they had learned how to survive in harsh conditions. They knew how to build earth houses, how to find water underground, how to coax crops from poor soil. They built again, slower this time, everyone older and more tired, but they built. And gradually, impossibly, life continued. Aponi grew into a woman who moved between worlds with grace. She learned English from the traders, learned to read and write, used these skills to negotiate with the agents and protect her people from the worst of the exploitation. But she also knew the old language, the old stories, carried them forward with the same fierce dedication her Aunt Ayana had shown. When Mapi died, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 75, the whole community mourned. She had been their anchor, their guide, the woman who had led them through the darkest times. It happened on a cool autumn morning, when the leaves on the few trees around the settlement were just beginning to turn gold and red. Ayana found her. She had gone to bring her mother breakfast and found her lying in her bed, still and cold. Her face peaceful, as if she had simply decided it was time to rest. The cry that Ayana made brought people running from all directions. Nataki arrived to find her sister kneeling beside their mother's body, rocking back and forth, keening in the old way, the sound tearing through the morning air like a physical wound. Nataki knelt beside her, placed a hand on Mapi's forehead. The skin was cold, had been cold for hours, probably. Their mother had died alone in the night, while they had all been sleeping. There was something unbearably sad about that a woman who had given so much to so many had died without anyone to hold her hand, to whisper comfort, to ease her passage. But looking at her face, Nataki thought maybe Mapi had wanted it that way. She had always been private about weakness, about vulnerability. Perhaps dying alone, on her own terms, was fitting. Perhaps it was the last act of control in a life that had been subject to so many forces beyond her control. They prepared her body according to tradition, washing her carefully, dressing her in her finest clothes, arranging her hair with the silver comb she had carried from the old home. Women came to help, singing the old funeral songs, their voices blending in harmonies that had been sung for generations, for hundreds of years, for time beyond memory. Kuruk and Amik built the funeral platform on the hillside, choosing the spot carefully, a place with a view of the whole settlement, of the valley spreading out below, of the sky vast and endless overhead. They worked in silence, their movements slow and deliberate, treating each timber as if it were precious, each knot tied as if it were sacred. The funeral was held 2 days later, giving people time to travel from neighboring settlements, from scattered camps, from wherever they had heard the news. Nearly 500 people came. More than Nataki had realized knew her mother, loved her, had been touched by her leadership and strength. The ceremony lasted all day. Speakers came forward one by one to share memories, to tell stories of how Mapi had helped them, guided them, saved them in some cases. An old woman spoke of how Mapi had delivered her baby when no midwife was available, had sat with her through a difficult labor, had refused to leave until both mother and child were safe. A young man told of how Mapi had taken him in when his own parents died, had fed him and clothed him and treated him as her own son. A council member described her wisdom in negotiations with the agents, her ability to find compromise that protected their people while appearing to comply with demands. The stories went on, painting a portrait of a woman who had lived with extraordinary grace under extraordinary pressure. A woman who had lost her home, her husband, her sons, but had never lost her determination to protect what remained. A woman who had led with quiet strength, with wisdom born of suffering, with love that manifested as action rather than words. When it came time for Nataki to speak, she stood before the assembled crowd, her throat tight, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "My mother taught me that survival is not enough," she said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "That we must survive with dignity, with identity, with memory intact. She showed me how to endure the unendurable, not by becoming hard, but by becoming stronger in our softness, by holding on to compassion and community, even when the world gave us every reason to become bitter and isolated." She paused, looking out at the faces watching her, young and old, familiar and strange, all marked by the same history of loss and resilience. She told me once that her greatest fear was not death, but forgetting. That we would lose our language, our stories, our connection to who we were before displacement. She worked every day to prevent that forgetting. She organized language lessons, cultural ceremonies, councils where the old ways were honored, even as we adapted to new realities. She made sure that we remained ourselves, even as we were forced to change. Nataki looked at Eponi, standing beside Kuruk, tears streaming down her young face. "She will not be forgotten. I will make sure of that. My children will make sure of that. Every person she touched will carry her forward. In the stories we tell, in the values we hold, in the way we live our lives. That is how she lives on. That is how we honor her." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the wind moving through the grass, carrying with it the scent of autumn and change and endings. They placed Mapi's body on the platform at sunset, when the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, colors so beautiful they seemed impossible. The shamans sang the final prayers, sending her spirit on its journey, asking the ancestors to welcome her home. And then they left her there, on the hillside, to return to the earth in the traditional way, surrounded by sky and wind and the endless grass, in a place that was not the home she had been born to, but was the home she had made, through will and work and unwavering love for her people. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the new settlement, and Nataki sang the funeral songs with a heart that felt both broken and grateful. Her mother had given her so much: strength, wisdom, an example of how to endure the unendurable. And now it was Nataki's turn to be that example for her own children, to carry forward the legacy, to be the anchor for the next generation.
Epilogue. Remembering Forward. 20 years later, Nataki stood on the same hillside, now 60 years old, her hair streaked with gray, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but still capable. Below, the settlement had grown into a proper town. Houses were built of wood now, lumber bought or traded for, a luxury but necessary. Gardens flourished, using techniques developed over decades of trial and error. Children played in the streets, speaking a mix of their traditional language and English, navigating two worlds with the ease of those who had never known anything different. A pony stood beside her, now a woman of 35 with children of her own. She was on the council, one of the leaders, carrying forward the work her grandmother had begun. "Tell me again," a pony said, "about the river, about the home we left?" Nataki smiled. This was a familiar request, one her daughter asked every year on this day, the anniversary of the first displacement, when they had burned their village and walked away. "The river was wide and clear," Nataki began. "It ran past our village, singing always, a voice that never stopped. Our lodges were tall and beautiful, made from saplings and bark, traditional style. The corn grew tall in our gardens, the fish were abundant. We were happy there, or as happy as people can be when they know happiness is fragile. And then they took it. And then they took it. With papers and promises, and ultimately with the threat of violence.
They took our land, our homes, everything we had built.
But we survived.
Yes, we survived. Your grandmother led us, and your uncle, and so many others who are gone now. We walked and we built, and we walked again and built again. We adapted. We endured."
"Was it worth it?"
a pony asked quietly.
"All the suffering? All the loss?"
Nataki considered the question carefully. That is the wrong question. Worth implies choice, implies that we could have chosen otherwise. We could not. So the question is not whether it was worth it, but what we do with what we have. And what we do is survive. We carry forward the memory of what was lost. We teach our children who they are, where they come from. We adapt without disappearing. That is what we do. The pony nodded slowly.
"And when they try to take this place too?"
"Then we will decide what to do then. But for now, we are here. We are alive. We are still ourselves. That is victory enough." They stood together, looking down at the town, at the children playing, at the smoke rising from cooking fires, at all the small signs of life continuing despite everything.
"Grandmother Mapi would be proud,"
a pony said. She would be. She is. Wherever she is. A small figure detached from the group of playing children and ran up the hill. A pony's daughter, Nataki's granddaughter, a girl of 8 with bright eyes and boundless energy. Her name was Mapi, named for her great-grandmother, carrying forward the legacy.
"Grandmother! Mother! Come down, they are telling stories."
Nataki smiled at the child.
What kind of stories? The old stories, about the river, about the long walk, about everything.
Then we should listen, Nataki said. Those are important stories. She took a granddaughter's hand, and together with a pony they walked down the hill toward the gathering. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, mountains rose like sentinels, ancient and enduring. They had lost so much, but they had not lost the ability to tell stories, to remember, to pass forward the knowledge of who they were and where they had come from. And as long as they could do that, as long as the stories lived, they would survive. Not as they had been, that world was gone forever. But as they were now, changed, adapted, resilient. The circle would continue. The children would grow and have children of their own. The stories would be told and retold, changing slightly with each telling, but carrying the essential truth forward. They were still here. Against all odds, against all attempts to erase them, they were still here. And they would continue to be here. As long as memory endured, as long as one person could tell another, this is who we are. This is where we came from. This is how we survived. The river might forget, but they would not.